Hey everyone, and welcome back. We've had a lot of requests to do a deep dive on covert contracts and relationships and how, those big societal institutions, how they always seem to be changing.
Yeah.
And today we're going to use Conrad Riker's book, Balance, Rejecting Extremism in All Forms, to unpack all of that.
It's a great book.
So get ready to uncover some hidden truths,
I'll be.
maybe challenge a few narratives we've all been told. I think this could be a real game changer for how we navigate relationships and even just like understand the world around us, those structures.
Yeah. And what's so interesting is that Riker doesn't just focus on the obvious extremism.
Right.
He talks about the subtle kind, the kind that disguises itself as progress, which can be even more dangerous.
Absolutely. Because you think things are getting better, but are they really? And he goes into some really hot button topics.
Oh, yeah.
So we're going to explore climate alarmism and how that can be used to manipulate and control people. We're going to talk about woke ideology and cancel culture. What does that mean for us? What does that mean for men specifically? And, what about the historical role of men in society? Has that been twisted or reframed in a way that we haven't really even realized?
Yeah.
And even education is on the table. Riker seems to think there's a lot going on beneath the surface.
Yeah, it's about connecting the dots,
Yeah.
You start to see how these separate issues, the climate stuff, woke culture, education, it's all intertwined. And that's where things get really eye-opening.
Okay, so let's jump right in. First up, climate alarmism and personal liberty. Riker argues that this push to save the planet, can sometimes be used to control people.
He uses Al Gore as an example.
Right.
Gore, who's a big advocate for climate change action, but his lifestyle doesn't really match up with that message.
Right.
So it makes you wonder, are we really supposed to be reducing our carbon footprint to help the environment, or is there maybe another agenda at play?
Right. And it's not just about individual choices, right?
Yeah.
Riker says even those big government solutions to environmental problems, might not be all they're cracked up to be. He uses the Great Green Wall in Africa as an example.
Oh, yeah.
Have you heard of that?
Yes.
It's like this massive tree planting project to try to combat desertification. Sounds amazing on paper.
It does.
But Riker argues that a lot of these projects get bogged down by bureaucracy and corruption.
Yeah.
So even with good intentions, you can end up with these unintended consequences.
Right.
And it raises some big questions about how we approach environmental issues and who benefits in the end.
Definitely.
Okay, so that's climate alarmism. Another area where Riker sees extremism is in woke ideology and cancel culture. He's really concerned about how cancel culture stifles free speech. It's like everyone's walking on eggshells afraid to say the wrong thing.
Right, and he uses the case of Justine Sacco to illustrate this. She was a PR executive who made a really bad joke on Twitter before boarding a flight. By the time she landed, she was facing this massive online backlash, lost her job, and basically became a cautionary tale.
Wow, that's intense.
Yeah.
Just one tweet can ruin your life.
Makes you think twice before posting anything these days, right? And Riker's point is that social media has created this mob mentality where people are very quick to judge and condemn, often without even knowing the whole story.
Right. And he also talks about James Damore, the Google engineer, who got fired for writing that memo about gender differences in the tech industry.
Yes. Damore's case really highlights the danger of silencing dissenting views.
Right.
I mean, Google, of all companies, they pride themselves on open discussion, but even they weren't immune to this cancel culture phenomenon.
Right.
And think about it, when you shut down certain viewpoints, you lose the chance to learn to grow, to find solutions.
Riker seems to think that this whole woke ideology has created a climate where masculinity is seen as a negative thing. Like he talks about how men are often portrayed in the media as either bumbling idiots or aggressive jerks. It's interesting, right? Think about the movies and TV shows you've seen recently. How many portray men as competent and emotionally intelligent? It's not exactly a common theme.
It's not.
So what does Riker suggest we do about all of this? He's not just pointing fingers, right?
Right.
He's got some solutions in mind.
Well, he argues that we need to reevaluate the role of men in society. Instead of tearing down masculinity, he says we should be celebrating it.
Okay.
The strength, the protectiveness, the leadership.
But he's not talking about some, outdated macho stereotype.
Yeah.
He's talking about the positive aspects of traditional male roles.
Yeah.
Like being a provider, a protector, a mentor.
Right, and he encourages things like male bonding and mentorship. He thinks that men need spaces where they can connect with each other, share their experiences, and learn from older generations.
Like instead of trying to erase those traditional roles,
Yeah,
maybe we should be figuring out how to adapt them to the modern world.
exactly.
Make them work for us, not against us.
And that's where Riker's idea of balance comes in. It's not about men versus women. It's about finding a way for both genders to thrive and contribute their unique strengths to society.
Okay, this is all pretty intense stuff. Before we move on, let me just recap what we've covered so far. We talked about how climate alarmism can sometimes be used for control, not just environmental protection.
Right.
We touched on the whole woke ideology and how cancel culture can shut down free speech and create this atmosphere of fear. And we started to explore Riker's ideas about masculinity and how it's being portrayed in a negative light.
Yeah, it's a lot to unpack, but it's important to understand these dynamics, especially if you're looking to navigate your own relationships and make sense of the world around you.
And we're just getting started. Next up, we're going to dive into Riker's critique of the education system. Hold on to your hats, folks. This is where things get really interesting.
Oh, yeah. A lot of people think education is just about learning facts and figures, but Riker argues that it's become much more than that. He sees it as a battleground for ideologies where certain groups are pushing their agenda onto students.
So he's saying that education isn't neutral anymore, that it's actually being used to shape how people think.
Exactly. He points to examples like the 1619 Project,
Right.
which you may have heard of. It's a curriculum that reframes American history around the legacy of slavery. Now, understanding the impact of slavery is crucial, but Riker argues that the 1619 Project goes too far, presenting a skewed perspective that paints the U.S. in a purely negative light.
So it's like they're rewriting history to fit a certain narrative.
That's what Riker believes. He's concerned that this kind of historical revisionism is becoming more common and that it's being used to push certain ideologies, often at the expense of accuracy and nuance.
And he's not just talking about American history. I remember reading something about how European history is being rewritten too.
Absolutely. He talks about how European history textbooks are now emphasizing the negative aspects of colonialism, often neglecting the complexities and achievements of those periods. And while it's important to acknowledge the dark side of history, Riker argues that we need to do it in a balanced way without erasing the positive contributions of past generations.
So it's about presenting the full picture, not just a selective version that fits a certain agenda.
Right. And Riker sees this kind of ideological bias seeping into all levels of education, from elementary school to universities. He argues that it's creating a culture of political correctness, where certain topics are off limits and dissenting views are silenced.
It's like you can't even have a real debate anymore because everyone's afraid of saying the wrong thing.
Exactly. And Riker worries that this is creating a generation of students who are intolerant of opposing viewpoints and unable to think critically for themselves.
So how does this all tie back into the idea of covert contracts? I mean, we've talked about climate alarmism, woke ideology, education. It seems like there's a pattern here.
There is. Riker's point is that these are all examples of how unspoken agreements shape our behavior and beliefs, often without us even realizing it. In the case of education, you might think you're just learning facts, but you're also being exposed to certain values and perspectives that can influence your worldview.
So it's like a hidden curriculum that's shaping how we see the world and how we interact with each other.
Exactly. And that's why it's so important to be aware of these covert contracts so you can make conscious choices about what you believe and how you want to live your life.
This is heavy stuff, but it's also incredibly insightful. I'm starting to see the world in a whole new light.
That's the power of Riker's book. It helps you connect the dots and see the bigger picture, which can be both empowering and unsettling.
So we've talked about climate change, woke ideology education, and how those can function as societal covert contracts.
Yeah.
But what about on a more personal level? How does this play out in our relationships?
That's where it gets really interesting. Riker argues that a lot of the problems we see in relationships stem from these unspoken agreements that we make with our partners.
So you're saying that even in our most intimate relationships, there are these hidden forces at play.
Absolutely. Think about it. How often do you hold back your true feelings or opinions because you're afraid of how your partner will react? How often do you do things you don't really want to do because you feel obligated? These could all be signs of a covert contract.
Wow, I never thought about it that way. But it makes sense.
Riker argues that these covert contracts can be really damaging to relationships because they create an imbalance of power and prevent genuine intimacy.
So if we're not even aware of these contracts, how can we break free from them?
Riker suggests that the first step is to become aware of them, to start paying attention to those unspoken agreements that are shaping your behavior. Then you can start to challenge them to communicate your needs and desires more openly and honestly.
It's like once you see the strings, you can start to cut them.
Exactly. It's about taking back your power and creating relationships that are based on mutual respect, trust, and open communication.
This is such valuable information. I know a lot of our listeners are struggling with these very issues in their own relationships.
And Riker's book can provide them with some powerful tools for change.
Okay, so we've talked about how covert contracts operate on a societal level and on a personal level. But what about the historical context? How did we get here?
That's a great question. Riker argues that a lot of the problems we see today stem from a shift in societal institutions, particularly over the last century. He believes that institutions that were once designed to promote stability and order have been infiltrated by ideologies that prioritize individual desires over the common good.
Can you give me an example of what he's talking about?
Sure, take the institution of marriage. Riker argues that marriage was traditionally seen as a sacred bond, a partnership designed for procreation and raising a family. But in recent decades, the focus has shifted to individual fulfillment and personal happiness.
So, like, the meaning of marriage has changed.
Exactly. And Riker argues that this shift has led to a decline in marriage rates and an increase in divorce rates as people are less willing to make the sacrifices required for a lasting commitment.
It's like the individual has become more important than the family unit.
That's one way to look at it. And Riker sees this as a problem because he believes that strong families are the foundation of a healthy society.
Okay, so marriage is one example. What are some other institutions that Riker thinks have been affected by this shift?
Well, he talks about education, as we've already discussed.
Yeah.
He argues that schools have become less about transmitting knowledge and values and more about promoting social justice and individual expression.
So it's less about academics and more about social engineering.
That's Riker's concern. He worries that this shift is leading to a decline in academic standards and a rise in ideological indoctrination.
He also seems to be critical of the media, right?
Yes, he argues that the media has become increasingly biased and sensationalistic, focusing on stories that generate outrage and division rather than those that promote understanding and unity.
It's like the media is more interested in clicks and ratings than in presenting the truth.
That's Riker's point. He believes that the media plays a powerful role in shaping public opinion and that this power is being abused to promote certain agendas.
So it's not just about informing people, it's about influencing them.
Exactly. And Riker sees this as a threat to democracy because it undermines our ability to make informed decisions.
This is all pretty disturbing stuff. It's like we're living in a world where the institutions we've always relied on are no longer serving us.
That's Riker's central argument. He believes that these institutions have been captured by ideologies that are harmful to individuals and to society as a whole.
So what does he suggest we do about it?
He calls for a return to those principles that have traditionally guided our institutions. Things like reasoned logic, individual responsibility, and a respect for the common good.
But how do we actually achieve that?
Yeah.
I mean, these institutions seem so entrenched in their current ideologies.
Riker argues that change starts with individuals. He encourages people to become more aware of these issues, to educate themselves, to engage in civil discourse, and to support those institutions that are still aligned with traditional values.
So it's not about overthrowing the system, it's about working within it to promote positive change.
Exactly. It's about reclaiming those institutions and making them serve us again.
This is a powerful message.
Yeah.
It gives me hope that we can turn things around.
Me too. Riker's book is a call to action, a reminder that we have a voice and that we can make a difference.
This has been a really eye-opening conversation. I'm starting to see the world in a whole new light.
That's the beauty of Riker's work. It challenges us to think critically and to question the narratives that we've been told.
Okay, we've covered a lot of ground here, but there's still so much to unpack. In the next segment, we'll delve deeper into Riker's solutions and explore what we can do as individuals to navigate this complex world and create more fulfilling relationships. All right, so we've talked about the problems, these covert contracts that seem to be operating in society and even in our own relationships. But what can we actually do about it? Like, Riker doesn't just leave us hanging, does he?
No, he definitely offers some solutions. And it all starts with awareness. Once you understand the dynamics at play, you can start to make conscious choices about how you want to live your life.
So it's about taking back control, right? Like not
Yeah.
just being swept along by these currents that we don't even see.
Exactly. Riker encourages us to become more discerning, to question the narratives that we're being fed, and to think critically about the information that's coming at us from all sides.
He talks a lot about the importance of balance, right? Not swinging from one extreme to the other, but finding that middle ground where things can actually work.
Yes, that's a key theme throughout the book. He sees extremism as the root of many of our problems, whether it's on the left or the right. He encourages us to reject those extremes and to seek out those voices of reason and moderation.
And this applies to our relationships too, right? Like finding that balance between our needs and our partner's needs.
Absolutely. Riker argues that healthy relationships are based on mutual respect, open communication, and a willingness to compromise. It's not about one person dominating or controlling the other. It's about finding that sweet spot where both partners feel heard and valued.
Okay, so how do we actually do that? I mean, it's easy to say find balance, but how do we put that into practice?
Well, Riker offers some practical suggestions. For example, he talks about the importance of setting boundaries.
Okay.
This means being clear about your needs and limits and being willing to say no when someone is trying to cross those boundaries.
It's like standing up for yourself, right? Like
Right.
not letting people walk all over you.
Exactly. And it's also about respecting the boundaries of others. It's a two-way street.
He also talks about the importance of communication, right? Like really talking to your partner, not just about the surface stuff, but about your deeper feelings and needs.
Yes, open and honest communication is crucial for any healthy relationship. It's about creating a safe space where you can both share your thoughts and feelings without fear of judgment or rejection.
And it's not just about talking, it's about listening too, right?
Yeah.
Like really hearing what your partner is saying and trying to understand their perspective.
Absolutely. Riker emphasizes the importance of empathy, of putting yourself in your partner's shoes and trying to see the world through their eyes.
This all sounds really great in theory, but what if you're already in a relationship where there's a lot of imbalance and resentment? Can you actually fix that?
Riker believes that it's possible to repair damaged relationships, but it takes work. It requires both partners to be willing to acknowledge the problems, to communicate openly and honestly, and to make a conscious effort to change their behavior.
So it's not about blaming each other. It's about working together to find solutions.
Exactly, and sometimes that might mean seeking professional help.
Right.
Riker acknowledges that there are times when couples need outside guidance to navigate through particularly difficult challenges.
It's like you don't have to go through this alone. There are resources available to help you.
Right, and Riker also talks about the importance of self-care. He emphasizes the need to take care of your own physical, emotional, and mental well-being so you can show up as the best version of yourself in your relationships.
It's like you can't pour from an empty cup, right? You have to take care of yourself first.
Exactly. And that means taking time for yourself, doing things that you enjoy, and making sure your needs are being met.
So this has been an incredibly insightful deep dive. I mean, Riker's book really challenges us to think critically about the world around us and to take responsibility for creating the lives we want.
It's a powerful reminder that we have more agency than we often realize. We can choose to be aware of the covert contracts that are operating in our lives, and we can choose to challenge them and create something better.
If you're interested in exploring these ideas further, I highly recommend checking out Balance, Rejecting Extremism in All Forms. You can find it on Amazon Kindle and Google Play Books.
It's a book that will stay with you long after you finish reading it. It's a call to action, a challenge to wake up, to step into your power, and to create a world that is more balanced, more just, and more fulfilling for everyone.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll be back soon with another episode exploring a new topic. Until then, keep those minds open and those questions coming.